Echo's Box podcast is not meant to be or claiming to be a good place for therapeutic advice. The host is not a licensed therapist and is not offering any services or advice related to mental health in a professional manner. The content discussed on Echo's Box is commonly highly explicit due to the real nature of expressing honest emotions. While we don't mean to offend anyone, the reality is these discussions might be triggering to many people. Out of respect for all, please do not listen if this content isn't right for you, and forgive us if you have a poor experience. Keep your brain healthy.
Take me for all I have and all I am. You're the whisper in my sins, so come back to me. I'm helpless and hopelessly lost inside the place I call myself. You'll find me there.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Echo's Box. This is episode 7, and we are going to be talking about relationships today. Not just dating, all kinds of relationships and just different perspectives and experiences. But we will get a peek into my dating life. I feel like this will be a nice, relatable episode for some people, hopefully. But anyway, that song that you were just listening to actually isn't even a real band. That was just two of my other buddies. They made a project back in like 2013. It was just really one of the guys, and he made this little band called Never Endeavor, and that song was called Sea Snakes, but that was like just a kind of a one-off thing. He was just trying to release some cool music, and that song honestly was dope. When that came out back in 2013, it was on repeat, even though it was like my friend's song. Like it was good. But yeah, I didn't honestly know what I was going to do. This whole episode is going to be totally off the cuff. I've not scripted out any outline or any notes. And as a result, I didn't know what song I was going to pick to match. So I just remembered that song and was like, oh, I'll do a nostalgia throwback. I can do that safely without getting sued, unless my buddy Seth wants to sue me. But, you know, I think we'll have bigger issues then. But yeah, I mean, the song is still dope. Go check it out. Like I said, Never Endeavor, Sea Snakes, but it's not really a band. There's no more music coming out from that, so don't look out for that. But Toby Rose is one of the main producers. Like that was his song. So if you like that song, keep an eye out on whatever other stuff he does in the future. As far as I know, he's still doing music. But anyway, yeah, today's episode, like I said, is going to be relationships, and like I said, it's kind of off the cuff. I've been having a really rough weekend again. Honestly, this seems like a recurring theme. Anytime I go out and do something extravagant, I feel like I always come home with something negative just kind of looming over my shoulders, and I'm never really quite sure how it got there or where it came from, because as far as I know, that's not what I'm putting out there to other people. At least I hope not. Like that would be totally out of character and out of my intention. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that, because that's going to relate a little bit to kind of how I got to the conclusions I came to. But I've kind of stopped being okay with not addressing different negative emotions. So like, I guess I've stopped being okay with not being okay, but not really. Like, it's important to not feel okay. That is also a valid emotion, and that'll kind of be part of what we talk about. But they're your emotions, and I am tired of not being in control. And so that kind of comes back to like things like anxiety or depression and intrusive thoughts, like the things that are really difficult for me just because of my brain chemistry and my experiences. I'm trying to fight that a lot harder. I'm really sick of it. And it's driving me up the wall. And I know it's not going to be perfect. I know I'm not going to get rid of it. I know it's going to take a lot of energy out of me. And as y'all illustrate what's been going on with me, you'll see how draining it can be. But I would almost rather be drained from fighting it than drained from experiencing something I don't deserve to experience. So I don't know. I'm still learning, but I think even though I'm figuring out that dynamic with my own mental health, there are still some fundamental truths that I have acquired from that even if I have a hard time internalizing them, that doesn't make them any less true. So yeah, the kind of idea for this came because I've been kind of wallowing in my shit all weekend, and I kind of looked at myself and was like, man, you've been through way worse stuff. Why are you wallowing in this? Why are you letting this feed on your energy? That's not okay. So we're going to get a little spiritual in this episode. So if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to tune out. But honestly, hopefully it'll make sense in terms of just general psychology, but I'm going to talk about it from my own perspective and what I kind of experience and practice, and kind of how I got the conclusions that I got and where I'm coming from and all this. And of course I'll boil it down back to I guess quote unquote reality in layman's terms, but it's important for me to emphasize that this is the path I took to get these conclusions. But it's also important to emphasize that this is not the only path to take. You can get this without any spirituality as well, which is kind of why I'm documenting it here. For a while now, I have been recognizing how bad my clinginess in terms of like anxious attachment is. Like, I'm not a very clingy person. Like, I don't need to be around you all the time. And this again, and I'm extracting, well, you'll know when I'm talking about the difference between dating and romantic relationships and like friendships. So for now, just abstract it. It's all relationships. Doesn't matter if my mom, my significant other, my friend, my dog, doesn't matter. We're talking about all of it now, and I'll break down the specifics as we go. But what I've kind of learned is I have a problem with anxious attachment, and I don't need to be around people all the time. I'm totally content with being alone. In fact, I almost prefer being alone most of the time, not because I enjoy loneliness. In fact, I really hate that, but because I am just an independent person. I get along just fine by myself. I like to have others around because I love people, but I don't need it all the time. But what I do have is kind of this feeling, or what I used to have, and this is something I'm proud to say I've conquered this very successfully. I used to have a really bad sense of anxious attachment. And what that was basically I would want other people to constantly affirm that everything was okay, that they were going to come see me, or that they were going to do whatever it is they said to do, or they were going to communicate with me during the day or text me or whatever. I used to have like with the ex I have, my previous significant other that I've talked about before, where we dated for 8 years. I used to always want to be talking to her, and throughout our relationship, she reciprocated that really well. But what happened often is when she finally needed a break, I'd freak out. Like, I'd be super anxious, and it wouldn't make any sense. And back then I didn't see it that way. Now I'm like, dude, you're a fucking idiot. Like, why did you feel that way? Why were you so anxiously attached to that communication medium? And why were you so attached to things always being a specific way and not... I basically was totally averse to change. I didn't want to experience anything that felt uncomfortable, and that, like, if I wasn't talking to the person that I loved, I felt uncomfortable. And a lot of that eventually boiled down to just not caring for myself and depression. And so I'm feeding, basically being an energy vampire off of the people I love, getting my happiness from them and draining them. And ultimately that's why that relationship failed. And I learned not to do that, not to be that person, because that's not who I am or who I want to be. But it gets more complicated than that, because it also pertains to like expectation setting, right? So like, if I have the expectation set that I am going to see a certain person on a certain day, or I've been texting somebody all day and then suddenly they stop, I used to have this problem where I would get really confused. And you see a lot of, like, in modern culture today's different memes and TikToks and videos and shorts and whatever, that's like people joke about this anxious attachment. So this is not a concept that's unique to me. This is a concept many people feel, and I'm sure some of you relate to this, that you've experienced it, and many people kind of brush it off. But those who do experience it and don't brush it off, a lot of times they just internalize it. So one of two things that I see often is they'll internalize it or they'll lash out. So those who internalize it just sit and wallow in it and feel just immense stress and grief and anxiety until inevitably whatever they were freaking out over either comes to pass, or they receive the affirmation just in time. It just wasn't on their clock, so they were confused. It's also really similar to another kind of phenomena that I see on various social media, where it's like you'll have a skit where it's like, two people, then it's like a person, their significant other, and they're cuddling on the couch or whatever, and one of them's really insecure and the other one's just been showing nothing but love and affection. And the more insecure partner, the more anxious partner, pipes up after hours of affection, is like, hey, do you still like me? And it's like, of course they like you. They've been showing you affection for forever now, like that they're your partner. But it's that same anxiety, that same insecurity that drives that emotional palette of sorts to where people just kind of fall into it. They keep going back for another taste of being anxious, because they don't expect people to love them, to care for them, and to and basically without it being showed to them, they cannot internalize it. And I used to be a lot like that. And it's toxic. You can't be like that all the time. It's okay to feel insecure, and it's okay to need affirmation. That's a completely different thing, and I'll talk about what healthy versions of that look like. But it's not okay to sit there and wallow in it. So we'll talk about the negative first, and I'll talk about what a positive side looks like. So again, this is all relationships, not just romantic relationships. But if you're feeling that sense of anxious attachment, and you're really diving into it, and you're one of the people that internalizes it, what you'll do to yourself is drain all your energy, because you'll spend all of your time focusing on it, kind of like I mentioned, and until it comes to pass, you're going to still be drained. So even when it comes to pass, you're going to feel so much emptier than you did before, because all the energy that you received is going to put you in a neutral state again, or at best, honestly, and it's not going to be fully restored. Whereas if you were already at the neutral state and then you received that affirmation from whoever the other party is, then you'll feel so much better, because you wouldn't have felt negative to begin with. Another version of this, though, is, like I mentioned, is lashing out, and this is what I used to do. And these are equally unhealthy things, but one of them impacts you, the other one impacts your partner. And so they both are similar, because you kind of bottle things up, but when you lash out, instead of just dealing with it yourself, you let your partner know how bad you feel, and you basically almost gaslight them into thinking they did something wrong, when maybe they were just like busy with work or something, and sometimes there is something wrong. And a lot of the times there is a sense of intuition that we have as people, that anxiety is helpful. Anxiety does a specific thing for us, and anxiety is not a bad thing. And that's something I've only learned recently. I was talking about that in therapy this past week. But regardless, the anxiety that we feel in most of these anxious attached cases is more to do with the unknown. Like, there could be something wrong, but there also might not be something wrong. And we're just going to pretend like everything's wrong and the world's ending, and we really drain ourselves or drain our partners or our friends in those moments, and it's not healthy to do. So how did I get rid of that? I got rid of it by experiencing it. So it was very awkward, right? I started talking to this new person that I'm romantically interested in, and I'm still talking to this person. I'll mention a couple other experiences about them. I don't want to talk about them too much, just for their own privacy and well-being, but I do want to talk about my perspective and my emotions. So I started talking to this person, and they are just like me. They're very independent, driven, doing their own thing, super smart, super just awesome. Like, I like this person a lot. I very, very much admire them. But what that territory comes with is they act how I do now. So over the past couple of years, I've developed into my personality an importance for taking time for myself and taking care of myself, especially with depression. And with me having a hard time really feeling and internalizing the emotions of love, even though I have a hard time feeling those things for myself, I still make it a large point to take actions that are reflective of what somebody who loves themselves would do, because ultimately I get the same benefit out of it. I just have a hard time feeling it. But if I sat there and hated myself, I would get nothing, right? So as part of that, I just ignore people. I shut off my phone sometimes. I don't let people contact me. I live my life and I enjoy it. I go do what I want to do, and I do my best to enjoy things. Now, obviously the enjoyment and the depression, that's a whole other thing. We've talked about how I feel day to day, but these are my external actions that I'm really emphasizing here. And it's important that I do those things and take that time for myself and breathe. I go do my ceremonial magic work. I go read a book. I go work on music. I watch TV. I chill with my dogs. Just whatever it is that I am supposed to be doing, that I know I should do, I do that. And I put down the phone. I disconnect from everything around me, and I go and take care of it. And I always feel so much better just in my headspace knowing that those things are done. And sometimes I'm busy too. Like, sometimes I'm just busy with work, or I'm in meetings, or I had plans and I'm talking to people, or I'm trying to be present. That's a big thing for me, especially with the constant disassociation, is if I'm at a concert or a party or at a friend's house, I like to be fully in the moment. Rarely do I even pull out my phone anymore to take pictures, which often I do tend to regret, because I would like the memories, but that's just because my brain kind of sucks and doesn't like to remember good things, even though I do remember it. It's not like it's gone, but that's just difficult for me personally. So yeah, I tend to be like that, and she is exactly the same way. Like for example, she's been working all day today, and she texted me this morning when she got to work, just sent a picture of her work, and that was kind of it. I know she's read some messages throughout the day, but still she got, like, I've sent her random stuff throughout the day, just casually communicating, but I don't expect a text back. I don't expect anything. And but that's not how I started, right? So I started off, and I've been in relationships before this one. Like I said, we're still exploring what the hell this relationship is. But in, like, with people I've dated before, my last significant other, she also was often very busy and distant, and that turned into something less healthy. But she suffered with depression like I did, and as a result, she took time to care for herself with that. And so she was kind of the one that first roped me into this release from anxious attachments, because I would be able to find comfort in the fact that, hey, this is my partner and we've committed to each other. I don't have to think about anything else. I don't have to worry about if they're texting me right now or not, or what they're doing. As long as they're safe and happy, great. If they want to talk to me, they'll talk to me. And hopefully they do want to talk to me because they're my partner, right? But we don't have to talk all the time every day. That's not that important. What is important, though, is how I handled it. So at first, I was very, very anxious. But then I remembered how that went with that other partner that I had, and I hated it. I was like, nope, I'm not going to treat this person like that. I need to learn from my mistakes and treat these people how I would want them to feel, like how I just positively give them the space they need. Because if I had given my other partners that kind of space, they probably would have left with much less worse of a taste in their mouth for that person I was. And I need to better forgive myself for those kinds of things, because I was only aware of what I was aware of. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. And even though it was bad and it's wrong and I need to accept responsibility for those actions, I also need to be kind and still love that person, even though I consider them kind of dead to some extent, because they are, at least on a philosophical level, I am not that person. So, but I don't want to hate any part of me either, because that was me at one point, and the only reason I got to where I am is because I learned from who I was. So that's just critical for me. So when I was analyzing that and trying to have a healthier relationship moving forward, I took a really tough approach. I'm not necessarily recommending this. This is just what I did, and it ended up working for me. So I just dove head first. I was like, okay, I feel anxious right now. Let's go and address that. So what I did to address that was go and sit down with my thoughts. And at first I started a journal. I was like, okay, I feel anxious. I'm just acknowledging the feeling. I am experiencing this feeling of anxiousness and attachment issues, and I'm really living in it. But I'm not going to text my partner. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to text any friends about any of this. I'm not going to reach out to anyone, not because I don't want help, but because I shouldn't be feeling this to begin with. The anxious attachment I'm feeling is unfounded. It's not off of any intuition. It doesn't make any sense, and I shouldn't be feeling it. It is a toxic trait that needs to be rid of from my personality. And so I took that very seriously. I just sat down and said, all right, let's feel it. Let's feel anxious. Why are you feeling anxious? And after time of just sitting there and asking myself, why do you feel anxious, over and over again, and letting myself feel the anxiety flow through me and be anxious, and just tossing my phone to the wall and sitting there and whether I had to cry or be frustrated or whatever emotions came along with it, I let them come and I let them pass. And then at the end, I felt real silly, because once all the anxiety was out, and say my partner would text me back or something, I would be like, oh, see how all that anxiety was for nothing? See how that was not a useful way of using anxiety, and how toxic that is? Yeah, and I laughed at myself. I was like, that's ridiculous. You're acting like a child. This is not okay. Like, when you don't understand what's going on in the world, that's one thing. But my current awareness is that of someone who does very much understand that other people have lives and emotions and have to process things on their own. And I am more than aware of that, and I'm extremely self-aware of that of myself. So why am I still feeling this residual toxic trait? And so at the end of all that, I would be like, okay, well, obviously it's ridiculous, so let's stop. And then from there, I transitioned into meditation, and I did some what we refer to as shadow work, which is at a psychological level, It's just addressing aspects of yourself and kind of trying to orient them. Now, what that looks like in a spiritual mindset is I sit down and I meditate, and then I call out an emotion that I am experiencing or I want to deal with. It's kind of like talking to yourself, but you're isolating the emotion and talking to yourself not in a crazy way. Like it's like you're thinking. It's like if I were to sit, think, and mull over the concept of sadness, for example. That's all I'm doing, but I'm doing it in a more conversational way. So I sit down, I meditate, and I get to a point where I say, okay, I want to talk to the part of me that is anxiously attached. I want to talk to that trait and figure out what the hell is going on. And so I kind of call it out of me, and then I sit down and I acknowledge, hey, this is part of me. I love you. It's okay. You exist for a purpose, but let's be in control of what that purpose is. And so I had to sit there and kind of reflect for a while. And what that looks like for me and what that ended up being is recognizing that anxious attachment, and this is true of all the personality traits. Any emotion you have can actually be very, very toxic if you are not using it how either A, it's meant to be used in nature, or B, how you want to use it for yourself and your own intentions. So this thing was controlling me, but it's part of me. So that's not okay. It doesn't get to have full control. It needs to be loved and nurtured and be part of me, not in control of everything else. Because if anxious attachment is what I feel, when does sadness get a place? When does happiness get a place? We all need to be working together. This is my personality, my emotions, my mind. It is all me. So if something's out of line, I need to address it and get back in line, because we're complex organisms. You know, there's a lot of shit going on in our brains and our bodies, physically and mentally, emotionally. It's all over the place. So when one thing's out of whack, it can be detrimental sometimes, and it's especially true with thoughts and emotions. So I would sit down and I did all that, and at the end of it, what I realized was talking through and thinking through that emotion, I needed to learn what the purpose of that emotion is. What is the purpose of anxious attachment? Because it actually does serve a purpose. So, and this is where I'll get to, here's the positive side of that. So healthy anxious attachment often looks like an intuition from acknowledging things that seem kind of off that should make you anxious. And I'll talk a little bit about more anxiety in the eventual anxiety episode I'll do. So this will kind of be, or I'll kind of repeat some of what I'm talking about today in that and go a little deeper. But when you're talking about the anxious attachment stuff specifically, anxiety as a whole does serve a valid purpose. It sometimes makes great sense to be anxious about something that is anxiety driven. Like it's like if you're about to experience something kind of scary, or something you're nervous about, that even though it may be positive, anxiety is normal. It's just there to let you know, it's like, hey, it's kind of a big deal, and we're letting you know that's a big deal, and this is your body acknowledging that this to you is something that's important, and so you're anxious about it. Feel the anxiousness, and then kind of try to go and do the thing. That is a healthy form of anxiety. A healthy form of anxious attachment in that same vein then would be, my partner seemed really sad today, and they're not communicating, or my friend hasn't spoken to me in like days, or my family is acting real weird to somebody. Like there's a external circumstance going on that you can observe at a factual level, even if it has nothing to do with you, even if there's nothing going on, then it makes sense to be a little bit anxious and want to get communication. This is most common, honestly, in friendships and relationships. Like if your partner seems off and they're not talking to you about stuff, you'll feel anxious and you want them to communicate. Now, what you shouldn't do is go back to the toxic thing where you're like trying to force them to communicate, you make them feel bad or whatever. What you should do is probably give them a little space and then let them know, hey, I see that something's kind of off here. I'm acknowledging that this is weird and it's kind of anxious and it's not okay. Like there's something negative going on here, but I'm not going to press you. I don't know what it has to deal with, but I want you to know I'm here and acknowledge it. Take your time, and then you leave them alone. And when they want to come talk to you, they'll come talk to you. And I had this experience just this weekend. I went to a rave with the girl I'm talking to and a bunch of her friends, and I thought we had a great time. But at the end of the night, we all kind of, not all of us, there were two of us that seemed like we were still vibing and doing okay, but especially her and one of her friends, they were kind of seeming kind of melancholy and uncomfortable. And at one point she communicated with me and said, hey, I need some like space. I'm feeling overstimulated. I was like, oh shit, yeah, of course. But after that, I gave her a hug and I went home. They left and we all went our separate ways. But then the next day, she let me know. It's like, hey, I wanted to let you know that I'm uncomfortable. I don't know how to talk about it and all that. But I went all day without hearing anything from her, and I knew something was off because the energy was bad. You know, the vibes were bad. Whatever you want to take it from a spiritual perspective, I knew something was off just because that is how I perceive things and the lens I view the world through. But the point is, you can just look at people and know that something seems kind of negative or wrong. And I didn't know what it had to deal with. So I was anxious for a bit during the day, but then I realized, hey, this may have nothing to do with me. I don't like seeing her sad, but it doesn't mean that you did anything. And when she eventually let me know that she was feeling uncomfortable and something was off, I still, to this very moment, and this is why like I don't want to get too personal because we're going to talk and figure things out and it'll go and be how it is. But I still don't know if it's anything to do with me or something minor to do with me or another dynamic of other people who were there and present for, God, Lord, if I know. But for a while, the anxiety was kind of eating me alive again. And I had to look at myself and be like, no, we don't need this. And here's kind of my point with that. I'm describing a lot in the context of like a romantic relationship, but what's happening in those moments, and you can abstract this to just like a stranger you met on the street. Say you go and you talk to somebody and say you are giving them nothing but positivity and goodness, but maybe something you said or did, even though it was not your intention to be negative, came across the wrong way. Maybe a gesture, maybe the topic rubbed somebody. Maybe they're like, you could maybe make a bad joke that was in good faith, and how people will then respond is they will then respond in either a negative or positive way. Now, when people respond in a positive way, then they've reciprocated energy back to you for you to continue responding in a positive way. When they respond in a negative way, they have now projected onto you this negative energy after you projected positive energy onto them. Now there's an imbalance. That's what we call discomfort. So, but what you have to do with discomfort is not internalize it. You need to take a responsibility for your actions. You need to be situationally aware. You need to be direct and ask, hey, what did I do wrong? Like, let's correct this. Cause I promise I was not trying to be negative. Now, if you are being negative, that's on you. You need to take responsibility for that regardless. But even if you're being positive, you need to take responsibility because their emotions are just as valid as yours. However, you and them both deserve to wallow in some kind of discomfort. It's discomfort because it's desiring a natural resolution. Sometimes the resolution is just walking away and letting go. Some people don't want to resolve things. And at that point, there really is nothing you can do. It's just going to be uncomfortable, and you then have to go ground yourself. And there's mechanisms and ways to do that, whether you're spiritual or whether you could read a book or whether you decompress some way. That's what that is. Those kind of tools and ideas are for. But otherwise, the discomfort flows and it's being projected onto you. So you absorb that. And even if it's sensible, like even if it makes sense, it's still not comfortable, but you don't deserve to feel that way permanently. And so, for example, when I was feeling anxious about, after she kind of communicated her discomfort level and I still kind of don't know what's going on, I started spiraling. I was like, oh shit, what did I do? Was I dumb? Did I do something like I drank too much and said a bad joke? I remember at one point I brought her a drink and it had like Sprite in it. And neither of us really drink soda, but I didn't know what to get, and everybody said surprise me. I was getting drinks for multiple people. I made a dumb mistake. So like I started spiraling over that. And like, honestly, if she was pissed at me because I got a bad drink, then that's just not a healthy thing for her to do either. So I had to like kind of let that go, even though I feel so empathetic and bad that I did something bad. I have to like, come on, man. Like if that's driving things up the wall, that's not okay to begin with. But then there's like other things like, oh, well, did I communicate to somebody, or was I around when she was trying to have a conversation with somebody and then I butted in? Did I not read a social cue correctly? It was very hard for me to wrap my mind around what I could have possibly done, because I'm very, very, very self-aware and it's very important to me to care for all these people and just be empathetic and understand what's going on and not cause problems, because honestly, all the people I was with, all the friends she introduced me to, they were fantastic. I loved being with them. I loved dancing with them. I loved talking to them and having conversations. I could cry right now, honestly. That's how much fun I had with them. And so that's why it made me even more anxious and sad to learn that some of the people felt negative after, and I don't understand quite why. And like I said, still might not have anything to do with me for all I know. But I wallowed in it for a while. And at some point I had to be like, hey, you cannot sit here and feel negativity that is being projected onto you when you don't even know what the cause is. Because here's what's going to happen. And this is going to be a universal truth. If anybody ever has a problem with you and it's not resolved and you're letting it rot you from the inside, then you're missing the whole, like, how things work in general. So, like, for example, it's not like I'm never going to see this person again. We're going to talk about it at some point when they're ready. So I can make a choice now. I am holding on to this energy that's been sent to me. What I can do is throw it away and not care, which could be right in some cases. That's important with grounding and all that. Two, if I am not certain what to do with it, I can kind of hang on to it and be aware of it, but not take ownership of it because it's not mine. Now, once I learn more about the situation, I can now understand why that feels so discomfortable or negative, and take ownership and responsibility over any actions I had to contribute to that energy coming out, because it didn't come from nowhere. They responded that way for a reason. But you need to understand why that is, so that way you can take responsibility for your actions in that and dissolve the discomfort. And so that's kind of like, in my specific situation, it's kind of where I'm at. I would rather hang on to this a little bit and figure out what's going on, figure out if there was anything I contributed to in a negative way that I did not intend to, correct that, because that would not be okay, especially when knowing what my intentions were and knowing where my actions and where my head was. I feel confident that I definitely did not want to make anybody uncomfortable or out of place on purpose. In fact, that's why I was happy to buy people drinks, walk them through the crowds, trip sit, whatever. Like, I was off with 4 different people at any given time whenever it was requested. Now, I did want to be around her, so I prioritized her whenever I could, but she often asked me, hey, will you take care of this friend? Or, hey, will you? And I was more than happy to. Those people were beautiful, beautiful people, and I am so happy I was present for them. And so that's why, like, I have that attitude about all this, and I know what my actions were. It's not like I was totally fucked up and acting like a weirdo. But there could have been subtle things that I missed. And why would I be expected to know those things? How could I have known things without better communication about those items? And so I can take that information now and wallow in it and be uncomfortable all day. Or I can say, okay, well, this is how they felt. This is my perspective on this. I don't know what's going on, so I'm going to hang on to this because this person's important to me, and I want to make sure their emotions are validated and understood, and any wrongdoing is corrected, whether I did anything or not. I want to be there for this person. So that's the choice I'm choosing to make in this specific context. But that's true of the stranger on the street too. Once they fire back whatever that information is to you that's negative, you hold to that now, and then now you can go and ask the same questions. You can be like, hey, did what I say, like, offend you? You know, what's going on here? And then you can take ownership and apologize if it's something that needs to be apologized for, or reconcile if it's something you can discuss and communicate and come to a resolution to. It's not black and white. There's no one answer. It's all different emotions. It depends on the energy. I'm talking about something that's just generally uncomfortable and causing anxiety, and also there's like a tension of and fear of like this relationship type thing that I feel personally that's kind of on me, a little one-sided in a way, because nothing's being communicated. So that's like a recent event, right? But I've had other events like that have occurred where, and I remember my previous partner and I all the time would have those toxic moments, and when I think back to them, I can see just how dismissive I could be at times. Even though that wasn't my intention, I was so caught up in how anxious I felt that I wanted to be cared for first. And even if we did get to her stuff, which most of the time we did, it was only after I felt okay. And that's very selfish, and I don't like that. So when it comes to things like family, though, I would often feel guilt or fear with actions I would take that I know they wouldn't approve of. And as I got older and became an adult, we're kind of moving on from anxious attachment. I'm bad at transition. Now I'm just talking about general dynamics of relationships. So, like, for example, when I was a kid and I was getting taught that I don't know, something like weed is bad. Don't ever smoke weed. You're going to become a pothead and lose all your brain cells and live off of couch hopping for the rest of your life or be homeless. All that was coming from my family. And then now I'm an adult and I've used it and it's like, oh no, that's not how that works at all. At least not for me. And it's going pretty good. But if they were to listen to this podcast, which if you are, hey, it's on the internet, you're allowed to. I don't really care what you think now, but that's my point. In the past is I would have cared. I would have cared a lot and it would have eaten me alive. I wouldn't have wanted to talk about any of the stuff. I would have had to keep to myself. And what that does for me personally, or what that used to do, was let me not be me. I didn't get to be my full self. I didn't get to be true to myself. I couldn't find myself. That's a joke a lot of my friends make now whenever we like bring up old pictures of me. It's like, yeah, that was Casey before Casey found Casey. He actually found himself. And, I'm not whole. I'm not perfect, but at least I can confidently say I'm on the right path. Because even if this current personality dies off and I move on to the next, it was a stepping stone. It was part of it. But we'll get there when we get there. But I didn't have that at first. I didn't find myself. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted out of life and what to enjoy. And when I eventually found myself, I would realize things like my family's opinion, especially as a grown-ass adult, doesn't matter. It only matters what I think and feel. Now, that doesn't mean their opinions don't matter at all. If they have an opinion on something that resonates with you, that you agree with, then cool, incorporate that. But a lot of my family has a lot of ways of thinking and opinions and actions they like that I just grew out of. I don't see things the same way they do anymore. And that really can ruffle the feathers of the family dynamic a little bit when you start bringing up these things that they're kind of averse to versus things that you're okay with. So I just, instead of bottling it all up, now I just accept it as it is. And if I purposefully don't go looking for conflict, right? So I don't like go up to my family and be like, yeah, I'm going to smoke a blunt after this. That'd be stupid. But if they were to ask, I'm also not going to like hide it unless I just don't care to have that conversation, which usually that's the thing, is I'm not hiding anything. I just don't want to talk about it because I feel like I'm about to be berated. That is a valid thing to be concerned about because you're protecting yourself. But otherwise, I'm not worried about their judgment. I'm not worried about a judgment of my character or having to impress them or do anything about or make any changes. I am just worried about the confrontation at this point, because that is just an unhealthy response for them to do, and that's not on me, that's on them. So that's how like the family dynamics work. But like with friends, for example, it's also pretty similar. What I've experienced, well, I say it's also pretty similar. All of these things are exactly the same thing. We're just talking about different emotions and scenarios that we go through with all this. So I remember back when my 8-year relationship ended, one of my friends and I kind of had a falling out because of how he was treating her and treating me, and I started treating him pretty badly in return. And neither of us really deserved that. But tensions were high and emotions were confusing, and I wasn't the person I am now. I was still killing off that person. That ending that relationship really started the death of the person that I used to be. But as a result, over the years, especially with like the pandemic and not talking to anybody and being kind of isolated, that friend and I just grew apart. We didn't talk anymore. And then as things kind of started to come around, we started talking again, and I had this incredible fear that I would not be accepted, loved, or even liked by all those old friends I had. So I kind of purposely avoid, and I still avoid some of them because I still kind of hang on to that fear just a little bit, and I'm working on it. But I think it's just residual, because what I've experienced at this point, I can tell that fear that's not valid. And if it is true, if I'm not accepted, then that's good. I need to know that so I can move on and be myself. So like, yeah, I'm working on it, but at least I know the answer. I just don't fully feel it all well-rounded yet. But like, the reason this fear crops up is because these friends were friends with the person that doesn't exist anymore. And so when they come back, it's like they're meeting a whole new human being that they think is the person that they used to know. And so they often treat me the way they used to treat me. They use the same language. They use the same mannerisms. They use the same kind of attitudes and different means of physical responses and actions, like whatever it is, they would use all those, but I don't necessarily vibe with that anymore. That's not who I am. That's not how I speak. That's not how I act. That's not how I think. It's completely different now. And so all I can do is when they present that is essentially gently remind them that that's not who they're talking to now. And I don't do that being like, that's not me anymore. What I do is like, say somebody asked me about, what I think about my, let's do a dark one. Let's go dark. What do I think about my ex? Not my most recent one, but the one that I always bring up, that I always go back to, which I apologize. I'm so sorry that I keep talking about stuff, but trauma's trauma. I mean, no ill will. And that's exactly what I'm trying to illustrate here, is that in the past, I would have described to people that she is somebody that I love and care for, and would be up in arms at any negative thing that would come across the table. Now, my perspective is if somebody says something negative, I kind of let it go, because they're allowed to have that opinion. I feel differently about her in different ways now. I still think she is a wonderful person, but right now there's no place for her in my life, and no place for me in hers, and that's fine. And I don't really have any desire to be around her in that capacity. But I would be, if I ever saw her again, I'd be completely cordial and caring. And if she ever needed anything, I would be more than happy to oblige, because I think she is a wonderful person. And I think that of all people now, and that's kind of my shift in perspective, is that they're trying to trauma bond essentially, and I've moved on, right? So like they're trying to come back to where we left off, and I'm like, no, I'm kind of over that and focusing on these new people. Like I've got this really beautiful new friend that I'm pursuing, and I think she's great, and I'm happy about that. And I like all the friends that I'm making along the way through all of this. Like, why would I be holding on to such resentful feelings? And it's the same thing with some of those friends too. That same friend I had a falling out with, I resented him more than I resented that ex-partner for a long time, because that was my best friend. I was like, damn dude, how did you drop the ball and then abandon me for a year just like she did? But it's more complicated. That's always more complicated than that. And that's the thing I realized that a lot of others around me don't think, or it's not that they may not think that through their own lens, but they don't think that I perceive the world that way, because they don't know, they hadn't been around me. And when I start acknowledging, it's like, oh no, we're just people on a fucking floating space rock doing our thing. And I know it's a hippie take, but like we're just here. Like, I don't want to hold a grudge against anybody. I don't want to feel negativity. I want to let all that shit go. Like, I want to feel it. Like, I want to experience it. It's valid. And that is the thin line that we get so caught up on as humans, is that we need to feel angry, but some of us, or not some of us, all of us, we hate discomfort. We don't like being angry. We don't like being sad. We don't like being negative in any way. But the reality is there's no such thing as a negative or positive emotion. These are connotations that we put on them based on how it makes us feel to experience things. And that's because a lot of the times it's out of our control. And so that's what I've been working on. So whether it's anxiety, sadness, loneliness was a big one that I had to deal with just the other night. I was like, why do I feel so alone? And I feel drained, and I didn't really want to text anybody, but I also didn't want to not talk to anybody. So like I just kind of chilled out for a bit and just meditated, relaxed. And then when I came out of it, people were messaging me, and I was like, see, all that for nothing. People will want to talk to you when they want to talk to you. And it's like, part of it's like almost the residual trauma of stuff like anxious attachment where you're doing that. But for me particularly, that instance was loneliness. So doing that same kind of exercise, whether you participate in the spiritual practice and you do actual shadow work, or if you just are dealing with your psyche and trying to address your emotions at a practical level, it's all fundamentally the same goal. It just kind of depends on who you are and how and what lens you view life through, right? So I really am hopeful that a lot of the anxiety and a lot of the loneliness, a lot of the quote unquote negative things that I'm feeling, by continuing this practice the same way I got over the anxious attachment stuff, I can get over some of the more negative aspects. Like, for example, loneliness is a bit more complex for me because it is a symptom of my depression. So I don't just get rid of it. However, I can be in control, just like I am with the anxious attachment. I can use it as a tool, because it's okay to be lonely. Right now, I'm alone. I'm in my office recording a poor podcast, a poorly written, because it's not written at all, podcast. I'm recording this podcast, and I am alone in my house. No one has texted me for hours. Nobody's contacted me for hours. I did see my friend earlier today, and we had a good time. Same friend I was talking about the falling out with. See, everything's going pretty good in different direction. These are all retrospective things, by the way. There have been recent things, but to me, anything I'm putting out there is because I've dealt with it, right? I'm not trying to drum up drama or cause issues or whatever. I'm just talking about experiences that I've made it through successfully, because that is what provides the value. If I haven't made it through it yet, then we're just kind of talking about bullshit and gossiping, and that's not cool. But yeah, I'm alone now, and it's objectively lonely. That's a fact. And what loneliness serves its purpose as an emotion is to let you know that you're alone. It's just like hey, you're alone right now. It's not supposed to be a bad thing though. but we immediately interpret that as a bad thing for many of us. Some people like being alone, so not everybody. But in my case, I've been alone for so long, all of my life, in my own mind. And that loneliness for me doesn't feel like just a physical loneliness. It's a mental loneliness of not being understood. And I've talked about that before. And but that's not the purpose of what loneliness does. Loneliness is there just to be like, hey, you're alone. But my loneliness likes to be like, hey, you're alone and you suck and you're always going to be alone and you're alone and not understood in your thoughts and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm trying to take a different approach is to say, hey, loneliness, you're valid, and I want you to be part of this ecosystem that is me, that is my emotions. And I want to be able to feel lonely in a healthy way, but I am so sick and tired of being lonely on a level that is hurting my brain, that causes me to not move, that causes me to overthink. That is not okay. We have to stop that. I want to love you and integrate this into my body and be lonely when it makes sense to be lonely. Same thing with anxiety, same thing with sadness, because all of these emotions are good. Every emotion we experience is a good thing. And good is even subjective. It's just a thing, honestly, because I'm putting the same connotation in the reverse. It's just a thing that we should be experiencing. It's part of us. It's not good nor bad, but it's important to experience all of it. But there can be healthy and unhealthy. I think those are maybe the terms we should use when describing how we're addressing these emotions, because the emotion itself, all of them are healthy. How we interact with them or how we respond to them or how we experiencing them can be healthy or unhealthy. I think that is a better way probably to go about differentiating those things. So I am tired of an unhealthy loneliness in my life. I want a healthy loneliness. So that's the path I've kind of started on with that, similar to the anxious attachment. Now, that's going to be a lot harder for me with depression, but I can at least put my headspace in an area where I'm acknowledging that, hey, we've talked about this in my head. I'm crazy, by the way, if you haven't quite figured that out yet. But no, in all seriousness, it's you have control over it, is kind of my point, is that I am talking through this problem of loneliness with myself, and I can then call out and say, okay, we've talked about this. Good loneliness or healthy loneliness is this. Unhealthy loneliness is what you're experiencing. So let's mark that as unhealthy loneliness. And at least, even if I can't get out of the thought loop, I can tag that as what it is. And when I can finally breathe again, I can let it go and then come back and try again. So even though it'll be a little bit harder with some emotions for me than others, it's still valuable to do because you can't get a grip otherwise. So that's kind of what I'm experiencing here lately, is a lot of, honestly, it's growth. It's really good things. But to get there, I have to challenge this notion that some of these emotions are bad rather than just experiencing them for what they are and incorporating them into my life. So I'm really hopeful as I move forward, whether it's the romantic relationship I'm currently pursuing, whether it's how I deal and talk to my friends, whether it's just anxiety of the world with its work, relationships with coworkers, any of that. I want to be able to, whenever I get that feeling of anything discomfort, that's just not comfortable, if it's any ounce of discomfort, I want to be able to recognize what that is and call it out immediately. Because, for example, it's like, say this weekend, if I had taken a different approach, when I noticed the discomfort, if I had addressed it quicker and been like, hey, I see it, don't have to talk about it right now, here's what it is, it would have been so much easier, and I would have been so much more at peace in myself through the weekend, because I would have known, okay, there is a thing going on. It has been addressed at least tangentially, and I can never say that word, but I'm not even going to try again. It's been addressed just in general, and I can kind of wait for whatever the next step is, and then let everybody else mull over their emotions, because while I've been sitting here talking about all this stuff, guess what? The other party that's been experiencing these emotions also has to go through the same thing I'm talking about, where they have to figure out, why do I feel discomfort? Because it's a two-way street. You're not the only one feeling uncomfortable. they are too. And so they have to mull over their emotions and figure it out, because sometimes I'm guilty of this for sure. Sometimes I will feel uncomfortable and it's not justified. And so I'll feel that discomfort and I'll be like, hey, I need some space. Something's off. And I want to blame the other person. So I project, but then I have to reel back a little bit and be like, oh no, there's no reason for me to really be upset about this. It was uncomfortable. I don't like that it happened, but it's also kind of not a big deal. And I kind of understand where this other person was coming from. So I'm going to let it go and resolve that. And that people are going that process, and that can take minutes and it can take weeks. It depends on how complex the situation is, right? So it's important to give both parties that space, but it's also important to do is acknowledge that there is an issue, so that both of you can then give each other the respect and space you need to deal with it, and then come together to talk about it when it's time. Now, when you're talking to the stranger on the street, hopefully that's immediate. If not, you should probably walk away. You don't know the person. Don't overexert your energy on them, even if you want to love them. If they don't want it, they're not going to be accepting of it. But otherwise, it'll resolve pretty quickly. So with a friend, maybe be pretty straightforward. I treat friends and partners the same, because my partner always will be my friend. So honestly, when it comes to friendships and partnerships in a romantic sense, they bleed the same line. I like to be very direct and loving and kind and empathetic to those people, because I love them. They are everything to me. The only difference between my friends and my romantic partner is one I do romantic stuff with, but both I do friend stuff with. But I love them all the same. I just prioritize one because that is my partner. And that's how I view the world and how I view those types of relationships. But otherwise, it's all the same. And same thing with family that I love. It makes it easy this is just my worldview, but it makes it easy for me to love. And I love to love. I love other people very much. And so the more I narrow it down and the more equally I treat everybody, the more love I can give, and the more transparent I can be, the more direct, and the better the relationships flow in these manners. So I know this was just like a big long stream of consciousness about relationships and about the dynamics of, we talked a lot about anxious attachment, but overall just relationships and discomfort. That was kind of the goal of what I wanted to talk about: managing your discomfort and being in charge of your emotions, and recognizing that it's all you, it's all part of you, and it's all valid. And there's nothing good or bad, but there is unhealthy and healthy ways to handle things. So I hope this was beneficial for everyone. I'll keep making episodes, and the next one will come out when it comes out. But here's my stream of consciousness, and I hope you enjoy it. Peace out, everyone.